So tonight we're going to talk about forts of Northeast Florida. And there's probably more than the ones we're going to cover. It might not be much in existence, but these are kind of the five main ones I wanted to talk to you all about. So we'll look at the location, we'll talk about the history, and we'll look at the fort. And if there's trails associated with the fort, then we'll look at those trails as well. And you can say we're going to go to Fort Clinch up on the north side, Fort Caroline, Fort Mose near St. Augustine, of course, the Castillo, we'll spend a little time there. And then we'll go a little further south and look at Fort Matanzas. Now, I want to just kind of, go over some early history of Florida before we get started so we can put some of this stuff in context. About 4000 BC or so, there's traces of an indigenous group that are known as the Archaic people. They built extensive shell mounds like what you're looking at here, and also shell rings on Big Talbot Island and Fort George Island and a bunch of places. This indigenous population disappeared at some point, and around 500 AD or so came the people that we're probably more used to, the Timucua, that occupied this area. And they occupied this area until they were wiped out through disease and so forth when the Europeans came over. 1564, the French established Fort Caroline. That's the first permanent establishment in the United States. And the Spanish started the missions then to convert the Timucua. There's also a little bit of slavery going on. And by the 1700s, all the Timucua were gone. So the first place we're going to look at here is at Fort Clinch. Hold on just a second. And it's located in Fernandina Beach. You can see where it's circled there. And pretty easy to find. Taking 95 north and getting off on A1A/200 here. And then when you get into Fernandina Beach, it's just a matter of turning on 8th Street, which A1A kind of does, and then turn right on Atlantic. And you'll see a sign down here near the east side of Fernandina there to go into the fort. So there's a long road that goes into the fort. We'll look at that. And the fort location is actually up here at the top. So Fort Clinch has quite a history. It was begun as part of a nationwide coastal defense that was started after the War of 1812, never fully completed. Then the Civil War became a Confederate fort for a very short time. Then the Union armies took it over and became a Union fort until the end of the Civil War. Then it was just kind of abandoned in a caretaker status. Revived during the Spanish-American War, just sort of as a possible defensive position. Then back to caretaker status. In 1935, the state bought it over, made a state park out of it, renovated by the Civilian Conservation Corps that did so much great work all over the United States. And it was even activated a little bit during World War II as a coastal surveillance site. You know, there are a lot of German submarines off our coast during World War II, so it kind of became a surveillance site for that. So let's take a look at the fort itself, and I think we'll go from the bottom to the top here. Here's Atlantic Avenue, and there's a sign here. You turn in, there's a ranger station where you pay a fee to come in, $6 per vehicle. If you're alone in the car, it's $4. And then you've got about a 3-mile drive up to the actual fort location. And there are trails that go on each side of this road all the way up. We'll talk more about those trails a little bit later. Near the top there is a turnoff here where you can go to a beach location and camping. So there's a beach out here. And there's also a small little like bird watching structure out there and camping off to the left. We'll talk a little about Willow and Magnolia Pond trails here, and then on up into the fort location. There's playground, picnic area, and visitor center with a little small museum, and then you go through that and go visit the fort itself. So this is entering the fort. That's the ranger station where you pay. Beautiful, beautiful drive down to the fort location. Isn't that pretty? And you can bike along there. This is the parking lot for the, at the fort at the end. Off the fort in this direction is the playground area and picnic area. And then you've got the Fort Clinch Visitor Center here. And you go through the Visitor Center, you pay a fee there, $250, I think, $250. And the Visitor Center has a small museum there where you can read about the evolution of the fort, how it was built, and so forth. A pretty good display. So now we're at the back end and walking up toward the fort itself. Beautiful view. I don't know if, how many of you have been to Fort Clinch, but it's definitely worth the trip. And you can watch down here on the bottom to see where we are. So we just came through the visitor center. We're entering into the fort itself. You can climb around the bastions. There are several rooms along the parade ground that are open. You can visit prison and guard rooms. I don't know why these forts always have a prisoner, but I guess in the military we've always got a need for a prison. There's several maintenance shops here, number 12, number 15, where you can go and visit. And then the bastions on the top are numbered here 2 through 6. So this is a look inside the parade ground. You can see that some of the buildings, it never did get quite completed. Look at the guard rooms have been refurbished, and enlisted barracks. And then you can go up the stairs right here and walk along the bastion. There's a view of the parade ground from the walls. You can walk along the ramparts. They've got good displays, beautiful views, as you've seen. All the rangers and people employed there are period actors, so they stay within their character, and whether they're a soldier or a guard or whatever, and so they talk through those voices, which is pretty interesting. So it's interesting history there. Now let's take a look at the trails. I mentioned that this is the Fort Clinch up here, and the trail goes down to the Willow Pond Trail area, but it also goes down almost all the way to the guardhouse and then comes back up the other side. There's a small place where they're trying to protect the dunes, and you can't hike on the dunes, so you've got a bit of a road walk there. But the traffic that goes through there drives pretty slow, and it's pretty safe. So if you wanted to do that whole hike, it's about 6 miles down and then back up. We'll look at the Willow Pond area. We won't do the whole trail. Notice too that mountain bikes are allowed on the trail, but they can only go one way, which is good. So hiking can go either way. So you can pick a way where you want either the cyclists coming towards you or coming up from behind you. So at this end of the parking lot where you first drive in is the trailhead. So this is the trailhead right here. And notice already this is the wrong way for bikes. So the other trailhead for the bikes is over this way. And again, there's a signage, given what the rules are. So we'll hike about a mile to the Willow Pond Nature Trail area. Beautiful hike through the woods. There is some parking there here at the Willow Pond location, but only for a few cars. It's really much better to park in the parking lot and just take the walk down. So there's two trails here. You can see here the Willow Loop, which is a little shorter than Magnolia Loop. It's a little longer. It's all well marked in there. But before we do that, we want to cross the street and look at what it remains of the one of the remains of the beacon navigation system that was on the island. This was the remains of a house that had the kerosene fuel tank that fueled the beacons themselves. And one of the beacon towers was right here. You can still see the base here. But there's good signage there that describes the beaconing system here. And the ships could line up these beacons and safely steer into the channel. Several of the beacons were even on rails so that they could be moved around based on how the sandbars changed getting into the sound. So it was a pretty good system for helping ships navigate into the Nassau Sound. So we'll go back to the trail and just kind of take a look at it. Very pretty trail. Several of these ponds were made just from the CCC digging up the ground in order to restore the fort. So it's not, a lot of these is not natural. But there's good birding and occasional gators and turtles in this area. And there's a view if you go down to the end of the Magnolia Trail. There's a nice view of the salt marsh as well. So again, at this point, you can continue the hike south or turn around, return to the parking lot. So this Fort Clinch is a nice little fort to explore. I haven't taken my grandkids up there, but I think I will. Beautiful trails to do either short or long hike. Bring your mountain bike if you want to do some mountain biking. You can also bike on the road itself that runs up to the fort. There's camping, there's beaches. So it's really a nice area. Let's move on down a little ways to Fort Caroline. This is in the Arlington area. Again, pretty easy to find. I-95 to Monument Road, and you just take Monument Road all the way to the end, and it bumps into Fort Caroline Road. You just follow Fort Caroline around, and the fort there is on the left. Now let's remember that we had indigenous people that have been living in this area since at least 4000 BC. And the Timucua were here when the French arrived in 1562. You know, Ponce came in 1513, landed somewhere in the middle of Florida and claimed it for Spain. But Jean Ribault came over in 1562 with a small number of settlers. He came to the mouth of the St. Johns River, called it the River of May because it was the 1st of May when he came to that location, was greeted by Timucua, and they built a small monument there, which nobody's been able to find, commemorating that event. And then he went on further north and left a small number of settlers who eventually had to come back. They couldn't sustain themselves. But in 1564, Laudonnière returns with enough settlers to establish a fort here at Fort Caroline. Again, he met with the Timucua, who were friendly, at least at first, but the Timucua were really interested in the French helping them in a war with another local tribe. And of course, settlers weren't interested in that. And so relations soured rather quickly between the Timucua and the settlers, not to the point of war, but definitely the point where there wasn't a whole lot of cooperation. That settlement had some problems until Ribault arrived with more settlers and supplies. And so they were able to establish and build Fort Caroline. Of course, Spain wasn't interested in the French having a foothold. They went up to expel the French while they were coming up north to attack Fort Caroline. Menendez was going, Ribault was going south to try to attack the Spanish at St. Augustine. So the Spanish came up, attacked the fort, slaughtered almost everybody. Meanwhile, Menendez went south, or the French went south. They were shipwrecked and eventually slaughtered by the Spanish. And then in 1568, just for spite, the French came back and attacked Fort Caroline, which was then Spanish held, and slaughtered the Spanish that were left. So you can see the fort changed hands a number of times. And you can see by these pictures that all this great history is captured in very nice informational signs around the Fort Caroline area. But it's quite a history. And so this was the end of the French occupation of the area. So let's take a look at overview of it. This is Fort Caroline Road, and you just turn up to the left. There's a sign that goes up to the visitor center. If you go a little further up the road, there's a replica of the Ribault Monument that you can visit. And across the street from Fort Caroline is a Spanish Pond Trail that leads to some beautiful trails inside the Theodore Roosevelt area there that are worth taking a look at. There's also a 1-mile nature trail there at the fort exhibit, which is a replica of what they think the fort looked like. So here's what you see. You turn left and come into the parking lot, and then there's the visitor center. The visitor center is closed right now. I don't know when it's going to open. It's closed due to COVID. And I've talked to a ranger. He didn't know when they would reopen. But I've got pictures from previous visits, so we can kind of take a look inside. They've really got a nice exhibit in the visitor center. So a good display of Timucuan history and the history of Fort Caroline. A lot of artifacts from the Northeast Florida region. There's an old dugout canoe from the Timucuan area. And this owl/man totem here actually comes from a different group of indigenous people down near the Orlando area. I'm not sure how it wound up here, but there it is. So that's pretty neat to see as well. So there's a little opening here in the building. The restrooms are on the left, the visitor center on the right. But you can go through that little hallway, that little pass-through, to go to the trail that leads down to the actual fort replica. So you see the sign there. It's a nice, flat, wide, easy half-mile. There's a little information about the trail and shows you how you can go down to the replica. There's a nice overlook of the River of May. And you know, a lot of the history is in their own words because the settlers recorded what was going on. So you get a pretty good idea about what they were doing, and the archaeologists got a good idea about what the fort looked like, although they don't know the exact location of it. They haven't been able to find the actual fort. So along the trail, there's a small replica of what parts of a Timucuan village would look like, and a replica of a dugout canoe. And then we arrive at the replica of the fort itself. Again, nobody knows where this actual location is. Might be in somebody's backyard that lives up that way for all we know. And here's a little story about, you know, how they built the fort. And of course, their settlement was outside of the fort walls, so they would go into the fort if need be for protection, but they also built a settlement outside the fort walls. And all these All these you see here are informational signs from around the fort that really give you a good picture of what was going on. Kind of what they thought the village might have looked like. Triangular fort, earth mounds, and included a moat. We'll just kind of take a look around some pretty views. Talking about the Spanish slaughter of the French people. And then when you come outside the fort, you'll see this little sign for a nature trail. And like I said, there's a nice little 1 mile nature trail that we'll take a look at. So the fort exhibit is here. Start the nature trail here. And it just winds down, well marked, no problem. And then comes out here where you can come right back out into the parking lot, or you could continue on back up to the main trail that you had taken down to the fort in the first place. A few little ups and downs. Beautiful live oak and longleaf pine area. Really pretty little hike. And then that leads back out to the parking area where you parked your car. So let's go up the street there and just take a look at the Ribault Monument. Like I say, it's just maybe a quarter mile, half a mile up Fort Caroline Road. You'll see a sign for it. This is what they imagined, maybe what the monument looked like from what Ribault had written about what he did. I know he left a coat of arms on a pillar. We know that much. But this is also a real pretty spot with a nice view. While you're there, you can cross the street to the Spanish Pond Trailhead and take a walk in the Theodore Roosevelt area. This area was all owned by a kind of a hermit guy named Willie Brown. And when he died, he left it to the Nature Conservancy with the rules that it be left as is, which it pretty much has been. So this is an amazing conservation story, this huge, beautiful area, all protected thanks to Willie Brown. I've done a whole virtual tour of the Theodore Roosevelt area. I've listed the link there. You can go back when you watch this video and get that, but it's on our website under virtual tours on our Sierra Club website, where you can find a link to that. So Fort Caroline, a lot of history about the first settlers there. The sad beginning, then the demise of the Timucua, based on the settlers bringing in smallpox, yellow fever, and any number of diseases, plus enslaving the Timucua and generally doing what they could to put a quick end to that civilization. Interesting replications of the fort and the Ribault Memorial. Pretty nature trail, as you saw, and access to this huge Theodore Roosevelt area, which is really a nice hike. Lots of history and stuff in there. There's shell mounds along this part of the trail here that were left by the archaic peoples and added to by the Timucua. Let's move on south to St. Augustine area. I don't know how many people of you have visited Fort Mose, but as you come down Route 1 into St. Augustine, you know those gates that you see on Route 1 right before you kind of come into St. Augustine. Right before those gates, you turn left, coming down from the north on Fort Mose Trail, and you can just follow it right into the historic park. So just to recall Florida history, passed back and forth between the British and Spanish a few times, began under Spanish control, back to British control for about 20 years, back to Spanish control until 1821, where it became part of the United States. So the Spanish established a settlement in 1738 named Fort Mose. And they established that for folks that were fleeing slavery in Georgia, mostly in Georgia and South Carolina. This was probably the original Underground Railroad. People could come south. They were in Spain. They could live freely, and so there was a home for them there. This became a sanctuary and probably the first African American community in what is now the United States. When they came down seeking freedom from the Spanish, they had to become Catholic and swear allegiance to the king. And that allegiance meant that they had to build a fort here to help protect St. Augustine from the British that were always coming down trying to take over Florida. So they established that fort, established regular patrols as part of the defense of St. Augustine. So it was established somewhere in this area. I think it's probably covered with water now, in 1738. But Oglethorpe from Georgia came down and captured Fort Mose, and all the residents had to be evacuated to St. Augustine. But 1752, the Spanish took it back and brought the residents back to build their fort in the second location. And this is a location that's been has been found and been investigated by archaeologists. And then, of course, when the U.S. came back and took over Florida, that was a bad sign for anybody that was African American that lived under the previous Spanish rule, because things were pretty harsh for. They didn't, the U.S. didn't believe in any freedom for these folks or anything else. So most of them were forced to get out, flee to Cuba or somewhere where they thought they could remain free. So in the late 80s, 1980s, an archaeological study was done of the Fort Mose, mostly this location. They were able to find quite a bit of remnants there, so they kind of know what the fort looked like and how people lived. Shortly thereafter, it was designated as a National Historic Landmark. So when you come into Fort Mose, come in off of Fort Mose Road into the parking lot. So you've come in this way. And this way to the museum and this way to the overlook that we've kind of looked at before. Lots of good informational signs in the parking lot telling the Fort Mose story, Fort Mose 1 and Fort Mose 2. Here's the visitor center. Small museum, but very good. There's a small entrance fee. You can see it's closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. But very good display. History, there's audio narratives. You can stand at different spots and you can listen to Fort Mose settlers and stuff like that. Very well done. And the back of the fort's very pretty. Or back of the visitor center. And then you can take this boardwalk out and look over the salt marsh and see the location of where the second fort was and about somewhere in there, wherever the first location was. So this is a fascinating history that's probably not well known. First African-American settlement in the U.S., first instance of an underground railroad as a path to freedom for enslaved people. And on your way to St. Augustine, it's an easy stop. Let's move on to Castillo. I think most of you know where the Castillo is. You come down Phillips Highway. Normally what I do is we take that second branch down here. You can either park at the fort, or you can park in that large parking garage that's located right about here and walk down to the fort. There's national park fees. Again, the Castillo was built because they kept on getting British attacks from the sea. And then finally the British came and settled Charleston, not too far away, which was a threat to St. Augustine. So they began building the Castillo in the 1670s. It took about 20 years to build the whole thing. and endured several attacks by the British. Now, when the British took over Florida, they renamed the Castillo. It got renamed a couple of times and then was designated National Monument to See in 1924. And the original name, Castillo de San Marcos, was restored in 1942. So it's shaped kind of like a star and a triangle. This helps deflect cannon from the sea. Also gives a lot of crossfire for invading forces. And the Castillo was never captured. It was built at coquina, which was mined locally. You enter across the moat. Of course, you pay at a gate that comes before the moat. There was a line down there when I was down there in April taking these photos due to COVID. So they have restrictions. They had restrictions. I don't know if they still do or not. So they only allow so many people in at a time. But I'm not sure whether those restrictions are still in place. This is the internal plaza, relatively small. Remember, again, this was mainly a defense from a sea attack. So most of the rooms on the ground level were there to store ammunition. But there's now a lot of historical displays and information. You can walk through the rooms. So it's very interesting to walk through there and read about some of the characters of the time. Then you can go up on the bastions on the second walk. Some beautiful views of St. Augustine, as you can see. They used to have cannon firing about, I think, probably once a month. I'm not sure if they do now. They'll probably start again once more restrictions are lifted. But like I say, I think a lot of you have been there, but it's a really, really interesting place to visit. And don't forget the most famous trail in St. Augustine, wonderful Fort George Street. So you can visit those trails while you're there. Oldest masonry fort in the United States, interesting history, great views, definitely worth a stop. Our last stop is at Fort Matanzas. This was located south near Crescent Beach, so you can come down 95, get off 206, over to Crescent Beach, then take A1A down to Fort Matanzas. This was closed, and there's no indication of when this is going to open. But let's take a tour of it anyway. It should open one of these days soon. So since St. Augustine was often attacked from the south, because they had the Castillo kind of defending the north side, they built this small fort in 1742 to protect the southern entrance. It was left to deteriorate after Spain took things back over and the U.S. took things back over, but it was designated as a national monument once the U.S. Took Florida back over permanently and went through several restorations. It's a very small fort. So coming down A1A, when things open back up, you can come into the visitor center. The fun of this is you take a little ferry ride over here to the actual fort, and you can visit the actual fort, climb around. Once a month, they have a cannon firing. So it's really pretty neat when all that is back open. Now, when that's going to be open, I don't know. I know that this dock got destroyed in a hurricane, but it's been rebuilt. So I think just a matter of time before Fort Matanzas opens back up. So it's a 50-foot square, which is pretty small, 30-foot tower. 5 guns on the top, and they defended it several times and kept forces from coming in. Normally just housed 6 men and 1 officer, but they could bulk up if there were invasions that they were worried about. But soldiers pulled a month there, so it was kind of a duty that you had to do once in a while. It also served as a great rest stop, Coast Guard station, advice on navigating through the waters and so forth. Take a couple more nice views from up at the top of the fort. So it's a neat little place to visit whenever it opens up again. And the ferry ride over was a lot of fun. You can climb around inside the fort. And of course, you've got some beautiful views of Matanzas Inlet. So really nice place to visit. So that's the end of a quick tour of the 5 forts in Northeast Florida.